Earlier in the course, when I was talking about Express Advanced Topics, I introduced you to a node package called config. We use this package to store the configuration settings of our application in JSON files or environment variables. So in this lecture, we're going to take this private key out and store it in an environment variable, because as I told you before, you should never store secrets in your code base. Otherwise, these secrets are visible to anyone who has access to your source code. So, back in the terminal, let's install the config module. Okay, note the version number. That's 1.29.4. Now, back in the code, first we need to create a new folder. That is config. In this folder, we add a default configuration file that is default.json. So a simple JSON object. We could have several settings here, but for now, I just want to add one setting. That is JWT private key. Now in this default JSON file, we're going to set this to an empty string. The actual value is not here. So here we're just defining a template for all the settings in our application. Now we need to create another file that is custom-environment-variables.json. Note the spelling, make sure to get it right. Otherwise, what I'm going to show you in this lecture is not going to work on your machine. So, as I told you before, in this file, we specify the mapping between our application settings and environment variables. So, I'm going to go back to our default.json, copy all this, paste it here. So this is the structure of our application setting object. Now we want to map this setting to an environment variable called JWT private key. But as a best practice, again, as I told you before, it's better to prefix this with an application name so you don't end up one application setting overriding another application setting. So vidly underline JWT private key. Now, with this, we can go back to our auth module. So auth.js. So this is one place we have referenced this secret. We're going to replace this with a call to config.get method. So first on the top, we need to import the config object. So const config. We set this to require config. Okay, now back in the post method, we call config.get and pass the name of the application setting. In this case, JWT private key. So now this is not a secret, it's the name of our application setting. The actual value, the actual secret will be in an environment variable. All right, one last change. We need to go to index.js. When the application starts, we want to make sure that this environment variable is set. Otherwise, we have to terminate the application because our authentication endpoint cannot function properly. So, once again on the top, we load the config module. Config, we set this to require config. Now, one more time, we're going to call config.get, pass the name of the application setting, JWT private key. Now, if this is not defined, we're going to log a fatal error. JWT private key is not defined. And then we need to exit the process. So earlier you learned about this process object. This is one of the global objects in Node. Here we have a method called exit. We give it a code. 0 indicates success. Anything but 0 means failure. Quite often we use exit 1 if you want to exit the process in case of an error. So currently I have not set this environment variable. Let's run the application and see what happens. So nodemon index.js. Okay, look, we got this fatal error. App crashed, waiting for file changes before starting. Now you might think the application is still running because nodemon is still there. It's not terminated. But if you go to Postman and send an HTTP request to the application, you will see that our application is not responding. So if the application crashes, NodeMon is still working. NodeMon is still running. Let me show you what I mean. So if instead of NodeMon, I run the application with Node, see, the application crashed, and now we're back in the terminal. So we are not responding to any requests received from the client. So now let's set the environment variable. As I told you before, on Mac you use export, on Windows you use set. So export Vitly underline JWT private key. We set this to, let's say, my secure key. Now let's run the application again. Node index. Okay, beautiful. We connected to MongoDB. And if we go back to Postman and send another request to login, here's our valid JSON Web Token that is signed with our private key that is stored in an environment variable.